How we doing, IWU? I heard that dog. No, it's good to be here. I have the honor and privilege to start off a new series on Mondays. On Mondays, we get in the Word, and so we go through a book of the Bible, and right now, we're going to go through Jonah. And this one's unique because we actually have 3 student preachers going through this 3-week series, and I get to kick us off. And so we're going to start off in Jonah 1, as you do. But I have a question. I have a few questions I want to start off with. The first one, by show of hands, who would say that they want to hear the voice of God? That they could hear the audible voice of God? I think it'd be pretty cool. Okay, another question. How many of you would say that you would want to hear God answer the question of what to do next? What to do in the summer, what to do after college, what to do as a job? How many would want to hear God say that? What to do next? And if he answered, would you say yes? Be careful what you ask for. Because what if God asks you to go to a place you don't want to go? This is the tension that we find ourselves in right away in the book of Jonah. When God calls, how will man respond? And then to that response, how will God respond to them? And so read with me in Jonah 1, verses 1 through 2. Now the word of the Lord came to Jonah, the son of Amittai, saying, "Arise, go to Nineveh, that great city, and call out against it, for the evil has come up before me." And so we're going to pause there because we need to know 2 things before we go on, not just for chapter 1 of Jonah, but for the whole book of Jonah. Who is Jonah and who is Nineveh? So Jonah, we only hear of this man one other time. And it's in 2 Kings 14:25, and he's a prophet for the king Jeroboam II, the king of Israel. And it says that, a few verses earlier, it says that this king did evil in the sight of the Lord. And so there's many people that think already Jonah's a bad guy because it says that he supports Jeroboam II. But if you read on, it's not as clear. Because Jonah supported him in the expansion of Israel, and God told him to speak that to Jeroboam. He said, "I'm going to bless Israel through Jeroboam." And so sometimes we don't know what to do with Jonah, how to feel about him. Some people think he's a really bad guy from the start. Others don't really know. But what we do know is that Jonah loves the nation of Israel. He supports the nation of Israel to expand its territory, to expand its influence. And this is the guy that God calls to go to Nineveh. Now, Nineveh is the capital of the Assyrian Empire. And the Assyrian Empire is known as one of the cruelest and most violent nations and empires of the ancient times. Just to give you a little glimpse of who these people are and how they would treat their enemies, not just their enemies, but their own people. They're known for having stone tablets of depicting them torturing, dismembering, and decapitating their enemies on stone tablets to boast about it. You know, they would dismember their enemies, and then they would leave one arm and a hand to shake the hand of their enemy as they're dying as a form of mockery. Not just this, they would make people carry around the decapitated heads of their loved ones and parade it around the city. So children carrying the heads of their parents, parents carrying the heads of their children. And not only this, they would skin people alive, they would burn children, they would force people into slavery. This is Nineveh. And I can't help but think that when Jonah gets called to Nineveh, that he's thinking of these tales that he's heard of what they do to their enemy. Now I will say, Nineveh right now, the Assyrian Empire, isn't as much of a threat to Israel as before because they have some internal affairs and internal problems. So that's why a part of the reason that Israel was able to expand is because the Assyrian Empire wasn't, and they weren't conquering that time. But those tales still ring in Jonah's head as he's called to Nineveh. And so I ask the question again. Do you want to know where God calls you to go? where's your Nineveh? Who is your Nineveh? Because God might call you to that very place. And I want to take a little time to talk about this whole idea of calling, because I think we've become people that are so paralyzed of fear to make the wrong decision that we won't make a decision unless we hear the audible voice of God like this. But I want to tell you, you don't need to hear the audible voice of God to know what to do next. We have the word of God that tells us what to do next. So you don't need to hear it to know what to do. Let me give a story. When I was in Costa Rica, my housemate when I was there was a 62-year-old South Korean. And I got to have a lot of times at the dinner table with him hearing stories of his life. He's a missionary. And so he began to tell me his life story. He said he was born and raised in South Korea. Then he went to North Korea to smuggle in Bibles, to pass them out to people, to get them the truth. And he said that they would come up and take it like candy because they wanted to know the truth so bad. But then as he's doing, the government kept on destroying the Bibles. It wasn't really a problem because the government could destroy it as fast as he was passing it out. And so what he did was, he took an image of one of their leaders and put it on the Bible, because for them, they can't destroy images of their leaders, present or past. And so now they can't destroy the Bible. And so he's passing out Bibles with images of their leaders. And this is when North Korea gets upset with him, because they're in a predicament. They don't like the Bible, but they can't destroy the image that is on it. And so they find him, and they threaten to kill him. They kick him out of the country. He goes back to South Korea. And what does he do? He goes off the coast to an island, gets weather balloons, puts Bibles in this package, attaches a fish hook and a fish line to a timer, and so that way he studied the wind patterns to send them over to North Korea so that at different times the Bibles would drop in North Korea. So North Korea knew it was him because, the images of the royal leaders on there. And so they told South Korea, if you don't get rid of this guy, we'll have even more problems. And so he got kicked out of his home country and told if he ever returns, he'll get killed. And so what does he do? He goes to China, starts smuggling Bibles in there, gets caught, gets told that he'll get killed if he keeps on doing this or if he returns, so he has to come to the States. And I'm sitting here in Costa Rica with him like, dude, what are you doing? Why are you here? And he told me, I'm here to learn Spanish so that way I can go to Cuba, because they're communist, to raise up missionaries to go to North Korea. Man's not going to stop. And I asked the question, in my own understanding, I'm like, so when did God tell you to do this? How did you know to do this? And he looked at me confused. Like, what do you mean, how did I know? He said, the Bible said so I did it. The Bible told me to go, so I went. I was like, really? There's nothing else? Like, God didn't tell you to go there or do that to risk your life? He's like, no, the Bible said so I did it. Charles Spurgeon is a famous theologian, and he has this quote that says, in Christianity, there's two things: missionaries and imposters. That we're all called to live on mission. And what does that mean practically? Because that kind of bumps into our lives, if we're not living as missionaries, to be called imposters. And my pastor back home puts it like this: your mission field is where your feet are. Your mission field is where your feet are. And so if you don't know what to do, the next step is to live out the Great Commission that my friend brought me to, where it says, go and make disciples of all nations, baptizing them in the name of the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit, where you are right now. And so I have this crazy, wild idea that as we start taking these steps of obedience, right, God will begin to reveal to us his will for our life and plan. That as you start taking these steps, that I'm going to make his name known now, he'll start to reveal what's next as you take the first step. He doesn't reveal to you the whole plan that you're going to be in Africa in 20 years without taking steps of obedience now. Psalms 119, 105 says, the word of the Lord is a lamp to my feet, a light to my path. Guys, a lamp's not bright. It's not like a lighthouse pointing down the whole path to know exactly what you're going to do. Every left turn that you take, every right turn you take, no, it shows the next step. So take the next step in obedience, and then guess what? You know the next one. And so we live in this time where, with me too, being paralyzed of making the wrong decision. God, I don't want to make the wrong decision. You want to know how you don't make the wrong decision? Keep the main thing the main thing. Keep the main thing the main thing. And what's that? To make his name known. So after college, do I go to Florida or do I go back home? Well, if I go to Florida, I'm going to make his name known. If I go back home, I'm going to make his name known. If I stay here, I'm going to make his name known. How could you make a wrong decision there if your heartbeat is to make his name known? But here's the thing, even if you do make the wrong decision, he can easily turn you around. Because what's easier to turn around? A car in motion or a car parked? If a car is moving forward and needs to turn around, you turn. But if you're parked, you aren't going forward or he can't turn you around. And so we don't need to hear the audible voice of God. It's in the scriptures. Do what it says, as my friend in Costa Rica did. But the thing is, some of us, myself included, have the arrogance to think that if God did speak audibly, we would say yes. And that's where we come to Jonah, who is called audibly. And what I expect to happen next, right, is that as a good prophet of the Lord, like every other time in the biblical narrative, it says, go to Nineveh. So Jonah got up and went to Nineveh. But we find out that Jonah has his own agenda. So bear with me with this image that God calls him to go to Nineveh, and he goes to Tarshish, right? Read with me in verse 3. It says, but Jonah rose to flee to Tarshish. From the presence of the Lord, he went down to Joppa and found a ship going to Tarshish. So he paid there and went down into it to go with them to Tarshish, away from the presence of the Lord. So if you don't get what that's saying, it's saying he's going to Tarshish away from the Lord. It says it like 3 times. But this idea is, God says to go to Nineveh, and he doesn't just go in the opposite direction. He goes to the farthest point he can away from Nineveh. God says, go to the east. He's like, I'm going to go to the west. God says, travel by land. He says, I'm going to go to the sea. God says, go to this big city. He goes to the end of the known world of that time. Why? Why does Jonah run? Jonah 4:2 gives light to this. And he said, and he prayed to the Lord and said, O Lord, is not this what I said when I was yet in my country? That is why I made haste to flee to Tarshish. Why? For I knew that you are a gracious God and merciful, slow to anger, abounding in steadfast love, and relenting from disaster. What a great reason to not go somewhere. Because of God's mercy. And so what's happening here is Jonah is evaluating the situation. He's like, if I go there, Nineveh might repent and God would forgive them. And Jonah doesn't want that. But can you blame him? Think about who I just described as Nineveh. This book does not ask you to point fingers at Jonah as the bad prophet and not obeying God. It asks you to ask the same question to yourself that God posed to Jonah. Are you down to follow the God of mercy? The God of mercy. The God who's merciful, compassionate, slow to anger, not wanting anyone to be destroyed, even the ones that you think deserve to be destroyed. Now some of you might go like, Isaac, wanting people to be destroyed, that's kind of aggressive, but I sure as heck don't want them to be just pardoned of all that they've done. Don't they deserve punishment? I don't think they should get that mercy. But I want to tell you, if you don't want mercy for your enemies, then you ultimately want their destruction. And that is where Jonah is. Jonah doesn't want mercy for Nineveh. Jonah doesn't want mercy for his enemies. He wants destruction. And so he runs because he knows that God doesn't want that for them. The greatest challenge that faces Jonah in this book, that also faces us today, the greatest challenge that faces every believer is not your devotion, it's not your discipline, it's not everything that you do or don't do. It's believing the Bible, that there's a God with a love so relentless, mercy so extensive, and a grace so unyielding, and it comes for you and for Nineveh. And we are ones to receive this mercy, to give this mercy, to take the message of mercy and reconciliation in the world, that there's a God who wants to reconcile with his enemies. But this message is the one that Jonah is not about. God says, take my mercy that I've given to you to them. And Jonah says, no. And so he runs the other way. And so we're begged to ask the question, what happens when someone, even a prophet or one of us, disobeys God, runs from God? What happens? Because in my eyes, wouldn't it make sense for God to just be like, all right, you don't want to extend mercy. I'm not gonna give you more mercy. I'm gonna go find someone else that's fit for the job that will give mercy. But that's not what we see. Jonah 1, 4 through 17. Let me summarize this for us. So it says it, right? It says that Jonah flees and he goes down to Tarshish, but it says he goes down to Joppa to go down into the ship to go to Tarshish. And the funny thing is, that ironic is, he's fleeing a pagan city, but he joins a boat with a bunch of pagans. And by the end of this, it says that they are the ones that fear the Lord and make oaths to him, and some would argue that they become believers. And so he runs away from a nation to bring them to God, full of pagans, and he comes to a boat with pagans, and even though he's reluctant, it seems like they come to know the Lord. But regardless, so he gets on the boat and they go to the sea, and God sends a fierce storm. So fierce that the sailors who have been sailing for a long time know that this isn't just any other storm. They know that it's divine, and so they start crying out to their gods and throwing over the cargo. And where's Jonah? Asleep in the hold of the boat. The pagans know what's going on and realize this is some divine intervention, and he's passed out at the bottom of the boat, not realizing, not caring about what's going on. And so they go down there and they wake him up and they're like, wake up, cry to your God so that we might be saved. And they go up to the top and they start casting lots. This is a way that they made decisions, and the lot fell on Jonah. And so to them, they knew who the culprit was, that Jonah's the reason that this storm is happening. And so they question him. Who are you? What are you doing? What's your occupation? All these things. And Jonah says, I am a Hebrew who worships the Lord, God of heaven, maker of the land and sea. Could you imagine being the sailors? What have you done? You said you followed the God who made the land and the sea? Brother, we're on the sea. Are you out of your God-given mind, man? To run from the God who made this and you run to it? And so they ask him, what should we do? And he says, throw me over. Throw me over. And props to the sailors, because at first they try to row back to land, but they see that it's no good. And so they throw him over. And as soon as he's thrown into the water, the storm ceases. The waters grow calm, and he sinks, and God sends a fish to swallow him up. And he's there for 3 days and 3 nights. And so what happens when someone disobeys God? What happens when someone runs away from God? God relentlessly pursues them. God goes after them. As much as the book of Jonah is about God's mercy for Nineveh and Jonah's enemies, chapter 1 is about God's mercy for Jonah and seeking the one who said no to him, seeking the one who ran away from him. God does not stand at a distance. It's not as if they were making the decision here. Jonah goes that way. God says, I'm going to wait over here in Nineveh until you get your act together and come over here and walk back. No, as Jonah goes that way, God pursues him. It says that he sent the storm. He went to the sea with him. And as he fell in the sea, he sent the fish. God pursued him. And the beautiful thing is that God chases you wherever you're at. No matter if it's the first step away from God and saying no, he's right behind you. No matter if it's a lifelong decisions of no from God, he's right behind you. So just turn around. I think this whole thing is so profound that God chases you. God chases you. The one who spoke and the world awoke. The one who laid the foundation of the world. The one who gave boundaries to the sea, saying, you will not go farther than this. The one who commands the morning to rise and the evening to set. The one whom lightning comes forward to report to you, saying, here I am, and does not strike apart from his command. The one whom light goes forth from, and the one whom darkness flees from. The one whom mountains shake before. Demons tremble at the name. The great I am, Yahweh, who says I am who I am, and he is the one that chases you. And this has been the story from the beginning. That when Adam and Eve sinned, it wasn't they who sought God, but rather it was God who sought them, and that is how it has been ever since. That the Bible is not about humanity's pursuit of God, rather it is about God's pursuit of humanity, and a humanity who runs away from him time and time again, and he still pursues every single time. Until we get to this point through history and into the future of when God in Revelation, it says that his dwelling is with his people. That he will be their God and they will be his people. This is why he pursues us, to be with us. To be with you. And so if you find yourself running from God, don't listen to the lie that he's standing at a distance. With arms crossed, all mad and stuff. Can't believe that you ran from him. You know better. No. If you said no to receiving him, he's pursuing you. If you've said no to something that he has called you to, he's pursuing you. And he will go to rock bottom if he needs to bring you back. And no matter where you are, as I said, if it's the first step or a lifelong, he's running after you. No matter how long you think you can run, I promise you, he can run longer. He can run longer after you. And the truth that we can't get away from in this story is that God is everywhere. The maker of all things. He is in all things. He is everywhere. Not only did Jonah separate himself as far as the east is from the west, but also it says that he went down to Joppa, he went down to the boat, he went down even further into the boat, and then he went down into the sea, and guess who was there through it all? God. In Psalms 139, verse 8, rings in my head as he pursues him. And it says, if I ascend to the heavens, you are there. And if I make my bed in the depths, you are there. And I want you guys to close your eyes for a minute and to listen to these truths spoken over you. That no matter where you find yourself, the truth is that God pursues you and that he is there. And so if you're celebrating today, he is there. If you're happy today, he's there. If you're on the mountaintop and things just seem to be open and working, everything falling into place, he's there. If you're obeying the Lord, he is there. If you're loving mercy, he is there. If you are feeling nothing, he is there. If you feel like you can't do the things you want to do, and the things that you don't want to do, you keep doing, he's there. If you're running away from God now and continuing to say no whether you know it or not, he's there. If you reject his mercy, he is there. If you feel chained down by sin and shame and the guilt that comes from that you should know better, he's there. And if you find yourself like Jonah in the depths, at rock bottom, in the belly of a fish, he is there. And the greatest truth that I can tell you is that wherever you are, God is running after you. And it just takes one turn around to see the loving arms of the Father, to say, son, daughter, welcome home.